Well, thanks for coming out on this cold morning. It's putting in the effort. I appreciate that. I mean, we appreciate that. I mean, it's really nice to see you. I'm serious. I'm being very serious. Thank you very much for taking the time to put in the effort in. And thank you to those of you who are with us by way of Channel 12 and by way of YouTube. Thanks for checking us out for a while. So, I want you to do something for me. In your mind, if you would, picture this. Picture this scene that I'm about to say. Okay? So, there's a 10-year-old boy. And this 10-year-old boy is marching in a parade in a little town, a little suburb of Boston called Belmont. He's with his Cub Scout troop. So the whole troop's marching along in the parade. And they're commemorating the ride of Paul Revere, so they're following that trail. And this little guy has the honor of carrying the American flag. So he's leading his troop, carrying the American flag through the streets of this little town. As they walk along, all of a sudden, he begins to get hit. He's getting hit by cans and rocks and even bottles. Turns out that there's this small group of people in the crowd and they're throwing this stuff at him. And as he's walking along, he can't figure out, well, what in the world's going on? Why are they throwing things at me? Well, his den mother and some of the other adults kind of shield him, and they take their troop and they get off the parade route. And they're standing on the side, and as they're caring for his wounds, this little guy's thinking to himself, well, maybe they don't like the Cub Scouts. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's why they're throwing things at me. But then he realized, but nobody else got hit. So he's just sitting there wondering, what in the world just happened? So the den mother takes him home, and he goes inside, and his parents see the cuts and marks and stuff and say, what in the world happened to you? And so he tells them what happened. And for the first time in his 10-year-old life, his parents sit him down to tell him about racism. They said to him, you know, those people threw those things at you because you're black. And he's thinking, what in the world? That doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody throw something at me just because I was black? So he didn't believe him. He said, that can't be the reason. Because he thought to himself, how can somebody hate me like that when they don't even know me? 10 years old, and he asked that question. What a deep, deep question. How can somebody hate me when they don't even know me? Well, our gospel today says this. Our gospel says, put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch. And I want you to know, for me, this statement means so much more than simply somebody saying, or Jesus saying, hey, here's a great way to catch fish. The story's about so much more than that. You see, for me, this story, this statement, in particular the statement, put out into deep waters and let down your nets for a catch, for me, that is a deep metaphor for how to live life. It's okay to stay in the shallow waters, but sometimes we got to push out into the deep waters. It's as if the gospel is saying to us all, push out, go out into the deep part of life. Because that's where you'll find a meaningful life. Ask hard questions self-reflect, do the deep stuff of life. Because that's where you'll find, as our prayer today said, an abundant life. That little 10-year-old boy, by asking that question, how can somebody hate me when they don't even know me? By asking that question, he moves out into the deep part of life. And he lives in a deeper life than he'd known before. Because it would have been so much easier to just say and stay in the shallow waters of fear and hate. It would have been so much easier to do that. To fear and hate the people who threw the stuff because they're racists. To fear and hate maybe even himself because of who he is. It would have been so much easier because it's easy to fear and to hate. Isn't it? But he doesn't do that. Instead of living from fear and hate, this young boy asked that question, and then trying to find a satisfactory answer to that question becomes one of the driving forces of his life. How can somebody hate me when they don't even know me? Well, that boy's name, and he's an adult now, but that boy's name is Daryl Davis. And if you want to hear his story more deeply, go on YouTube and put that in and you'll see it. But I'll give you a little version of it. So Daryl, during his adolescent years, trying to answer this question, read book after book after book after book after book about racism because he wanted to understand. And what he said was he never found a book that answered the question. So when he became an adult, he had an idea. He thought, who better to ask, how can you hate me when you don't even know me, than the national leader of a hate group? Who better to ask? Let's find out what this guy has to say about this, Daryl thought. So Daryl invited this guy named Roger Kelly to meet. Roger Kelly was the imperial wizard of the KKK. You know what the imperial wizard of the KKK is? He's the national leader of the KKK. So he invited this guy to meet with him. When people, his friends, found out that he was doing this, he was told, do not fool with that guy. Do not fool with Mr. Kelly, they said to Daryl. He'll kill you. But Daryl had to know. He had to find out and try to understand where somebody was coming from who hated him without even knowing him. So they met. His secretary set up this meeting, never told Roger Kelly that Daryl was black, just said he wants to know more about the KKK. Yeah, right? So they're going to meet at this hotel room. Daryl and his secretary get there first. Guy knocks on the door. Daryl opens the door, and there he is. Black guy. Well, what he said was they were startled because Roger Kelly came with an armed bodyguard. And when they saw him, they were startled. They were, what is this? But they didn't leave. They shook his hand, and they sat down, and they started talking. And that day and that conversation began an ongoing dialogue. They met regularly. Daryl said he realized this guy thinks I'm inferior to him. You could tell that. But he said he never threatened me. Eventually, Roger even went over to Daryl's house, first with his bodyguard, then by himself. And they just kept meeting and talking and meeting and talking. And eventually Darrell learned that Roger Kelly's beliefs about race and his hatred toward people different from him, they were kind of set by the time he was about 10 years old. The same age when Darrell asked his deep question. See, the thing is, Roger never asked a question like Darrell's. He just went along with everybody else. This is what everybody he knew believed. This is what everybody thinks. He just went along with everyone else's opinions and beliefs, and he lived in his own little echo chamber where nobody questioned it. They were all just in agreement. And so he lived this life filled with fear and hate of what and who he did not know. Well, despite their many conversations, Roger's opinions were set. You know what I mean? They were set. And so he never changed. So Darrell started inviting other people. He started inviting his Jewish friends. He started inviting other black friends. He started inviting anyone who this guy Roger said he hated, and he hated a lot. And he wanted them to just get introduced to these people so that maybe, just maybe, he would have a different view. But still no change. So one day they were meeting, and Darrell just said, I'm just going to tell you this. He said, you know, Roger, I don't agree with you about just about anything. And I don't respect your opinion about just about everything. He said, but I respect you because you're a human being, just like me. Our gospel says today, move out into deep waters. Move out into a deeper life. Because that's where you're going to find a deep, meaningful, abundant life. That's where it happens. Not in the shallow. It's okay to hang, but you got to get out there sometimes, or you'll lead a shallow life. Darrell Davis was swimming in deep waters, right? Did you see what he was able to do? He was able to separate Roger the human being from Roger his opinions and beliefs. Did you see that? You know how hard that is? Most of us cannot do it or will not do it. We're so tied to our opinions, we're so tied to our beliefs that we think that's us. And it's not. And Roger reminds us that we are more than our opinions. We are more than even our beliefs. And because of this, we can disagree and still respect each other. Because we share a common humanity. God, I hope you can hear that. Wouldn't that help the world? Because we cannot do it right now. And it can be done. We can disagree and still respect each other. Well, after 2 years, no change, just them meeting. Might not even seem like anything's happening. But after 2 years, Roger Kelly finally invited Darrell to a Klan rally. So he invites this dude to a Klan rally. What? I can't even imagine that. Yeah, go on YouTube just to see the pictures of that. And he went. Darrell went, and he just kept going. And he kept going. He kept going despite his friends, Darrell's friends, calling him a sellout. They said, man, you are a sellout for hanging out with all those racist people. And Daryl said, listen, I go to the rallies to try to engage people who for some reason think they hate me. And what I've learned by going to this and what I've learned by the conversations is that they're afraid of me. They're afraid of me because they don't know me. Ignorance breeds fear. Fear breeds hatred. Hatred breeds violence. You see, they're afraid of me because they don't know me, so I want them to know me. He said, if I can engage them in conversation, maybe, just maybe, they'll get to know me and they won't be afraid of me anymore. And beside all that, just because we're talking, we're not fighting. There's no violence. One person said to him, well, how can you talk to someone when they're calling you that word? You know that word. And Daryl replied, and this is where the self-reflection comes in. Daryl replied, I know who I am. They can't hurt me with their opinions about who they think I am. Finally, after many, many years, at a KKK rally, Brian Kelly, you know, the Grand Wizard or whatever the heck he's called, publicly said this about Daryl. He said, I don't agree with everything he thinks, but I respect him because he respects me. And he will sit down and he will listen to me. He said, I would go to hell and back for that man. Brian Kelly, not long after that, as you can imagine, resigned from the KKK. And he gave his robes to Daryl. So far, Daryl has helped over 200 people leave the KKK, and he has all their robes. Our gospel today says, move out. Move out from your shallow life into a deeper waters, into a deeper life. You can go back, but move out for a while because that's where you're going to find a meaningful life. Amen.